all of the functions of government. And I think it's going to be disastrous, and that's why I asked that we go through this process, not just as an exercise, but that we actually look for the functions and level of government and where we can all do our part. And I think that we still need to go down that path. I think that we need to hold folks accountable, not to 100%. We didn't ask the auditor to dig deeper and find the 9,400 that she's short, because it didn't seem reasonable. So I think that I still don't think I think we've talked around it. We spent a lot of hours going on sideline issues that don't really get to the bottom line of what we really need to do. And jumping forward to new hires and what would that cost, or what about the overtime, is really, I think, a distraction from, we've got to deal with this issue first, then we can have that discussion. If we can resolve things between now and, May, maybe we can have that discussion. But I think that we are going to need to find a way to get the cuts, some of the cuts within the sheriff's department. We're not telling him exactly where he has to cut, but I think if we just say that's off budget, that's offline. I mean, I think that to a certain degree, public safety has enjoyed that rather privileged position historically in terms of many cuts. Staffing levels have hit other departments more so than public safety. And I think that with the degree of diminishment of revenue that we have now, that can no longer be the case. We have to examine every department, and that's my point in going forward. I'm not asking the sheriff to find, luckily we're seeing now it's not 1.1 million, it's 900 and whatever it is, 900. Yeah, 970,000. But I'm still looking to see where the sheriff's department will do a portion of that. And I would just like to hear some commitment as to, can we go to 300,000 or 400,000? He's doing all the great things that he said he's doing. I'm the first to give him lots of credit for that. And he's been doing it religiously and with renewed effort and interest, and I applaud that. Okay. But we've still got to find the 900,000 in the organization, and so I'm looking for some type of equitable way to do that.
Supervisor Koufax, I'm looking for you to break us out of the circle.
No, I'm not going to break you out of the circle. It's going to be to say that first, Supervisor Smith is right. What happened back in August is that we politely evaded the issue. Supervisor Smith stayed with it. I got back into it. I capitulated. So there are three of us sitting up here who did not address this issue back in August. Tom was straightforward, said it's not enough. We got to resolve this. CEO's office said it is enough. We've got to resolve this. And we all politely agreed to disagree. And that's exactly where we are, and that's why we're having this discussion right now. And frankly, I find it inappropriate that somehow, because supervisor makes a very sharp or very pointed and very correct statement, that we have people jump up and say, well, this seems to be inappropriate and so forth. We've played nice for the last 5 or 6 months on this whole matter, but the reality is that the Sheriff's Department, for all of its accomplishments and for all of its fine work, and I'd be the first to jump up along with all of the other supervisors and probably most of the people in this room to commend Tom on the job he's done in so many ways. The reality is here is that the impact of trying to finesse this situation by saying, well, we'll pass it on somewhere else, it hits the rest of the organization. The organization has been pushed back about as far as it can be pushed back, and this happens to remain the elephant in the room, but it's the same elephant. It's the same. It may be a little smaller. It may be a little more lovable. It may be cuddly, or it may be angry as hell. But the reality is we have evaded this issue over and over again, and I would like to say that I strongly support Supervisor Smith's concern back in August, and it was there, and we did not do the job. And a couple of supervisors really pushed on this, and said, we've got to resolve it, and the job was not done. And now we have two new supervisors on board here who can say, well, we weren't here at that time to deal with it, but I would like to see here a recognition of you're simply coming into the game in the fourth quarter. And I'd like to see, you know, somebody who does the run back or steps up and says, sorry, Tom, you've got to do what's got to be done. And whatever Tom we're talking about should be up to you and all of us to decide. Because I think both Toms, in this particular case, agreed to be agreeable, leaving the whole thing heavily on the shoulders of the three supervisors that were here in August and right now. And I don't like, this is one of the most contentious and most divisive of all possible issues for this board to have to come up against. And I really find it very sad that we have not been simply fiscally responsible. We were not fiscally responsible in August, and we will not be fiscally responsible by cutting this off at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock tonight, walk out of here and think we've somehow accomplished something. There's a continuing saga of a dysfunctional situation here. And again, Tom and supervisors, I think the two Toms really, frankly, need to sit down and be prepared to butt heads and come back with recommendations to this board. Because without the two of you agreeing, all we are going to do up here is sit and either look very mean-spirited or be very nice, very anti-law enforcement or pro-law enforcement. And that's not what the game's all about. It's about fiscal responsibility. And historically, we have run up against this. So I want to refrain from commenting as this went forward, but till I had a solution. But I don't have the solution. The solution is bite the bullet. And I think the county, in general, has performed very well with coming up with solutions, but we can't push it back on the other departments. There's no round 4 in a three-round fight, and we're in the third round here, and I really think this is the point where we have to take some action. But I think the two Toms have to share responsibility of not providing this board with the kind of information and the kind of direction that it needed in August, so we would not be facing this kind of a stalemate here in March. And so I'll point a finger if we're going to point fingers, and maybe it goes something like this. And I'll take full responsibility for my failure not to step up and be more aggressive. Supervisor Smith voted against the budget back then, and I made a move in that direction and then capitulated. So no more nice guy here.
Supervisor McCown.
Well, I do think that many of Supervisor Colfax's comments are on point, but nevertheless, here we are now. And I do also agree that we need to look at every operation of the government. And before we go, I do want to say, I think it's almost like bait and switch to suggest to the sheriff in August, well, okay, these numbers don't mesh, but come back in February, and the representation was, or the expectation, there will be additional funding. And we're all aware that the economic world has collapsed since then, and it's certainly a different world, but still, in a sense, I think we're holding the sheriff to a little bit of a different standard, and some say it's more favoritism, and others might think it's a bit punitive. But you know, he didn't start off on the same ground that everybody else did. As far as looking at all the operations of government, I think one thing we should certainly do is let's take a look at what are the